The first thing Riggs Callahan learned about life outside the mire was its profound, almost spiritual devotion to smooth surfaces. On Earth, in the rust-eaten carcass of old Indiana, every surface told a story of violence. A bulkhead was a map of ricochets. A floor plate was a testament to pry bars and dragged machinery. A human face was a roadmap of bad decisions and worse luck. Here, aboard the transport shuttle to the Crucible, the walls were seamless, the floor was a single sheet of polished alloy, and the faces were unblemished canvases of placid curiosity. It made his skin crawl. He was a ghost haunting a palace, a creature of rust and ruin set loose in a sterile utopia, and he was certain everyone could smell the mire on him. It wasn't just grime. It was the faint, coppery scent of overheated circuits, the acrid tang of industrial solvents that had seeped into his bones, and the low-grade, persistent odor of desperation. This was his ticket out. The Stellar Compact's human integration mandate. A charity case on a galactic scale. A single scholarship to the most elite military academy in the known universe, awarded to one human desperate enough to apply. All he had to do was pretend he belonged. The shuttle docked with a sigh of perfectly calibrated pneumatics. The hatch irised open, revealing the grand intake hall of the Crucible. It was less a room and more a statement of power, a cavern of white and gold so vast it seemed to have its own weather systems. Light, pure and soft, emanated from the ceiling itself, reflecting off floors that looked like frozen milk. He tugged at the collar of his new cadet uniform, a stiff, unfamiliar fabric without a single scorch mark, patch, or blood stain. It felt like a borrowed skin. He walked toward a shimmering archway of pale blue energy, the designated registration point. Other cadets, beings of a dozen different morphologies, glided through it with nonchalant grace. A soft, pleasant chime accompanied each successful registration, a gentle melody that echoed through the immense space. Riggs took a breath that tasted of nothing at all and stepped forward. He passed through the curtain of light. It bathed him in a cool, tingling sensation. The soft chime sounded. Then the chime broke. It stuttered into a discordant squawk, then climbed an octave into a piercing shriek that clawed at his ears. The shriek was instantly consumed by a station-wide klaxon, a deep, resonant alarm that hammered through the floor plates and vibrated in Riggs's teeth. From slots in the ceiling he hadn't even noticed, blast doors dropped with the terminal velocity of a comet, each one meters thick, slammed into the floor with a concussive boom that shook the entire hall. Searing, crimson emergency beacons ignited, drowning the pristine white chambers in a hellish, pulsing red. Panels in the walls slid open. Armored sentinels, tall, slender beings with 4 articulated arms and helmets like polished obsidian, dropped into perfect combat stances. The low hum of their plasma rifles charging filled the sudden, dreadful quiet. Every single weapon was aimed at his chest. Riggs froze, one foot in front of the other. His brain, a machine honed for survival, offered a single, useless observation. "Well," he said to the silent, cavernous hall, "that's not ideal." A voice, calm and utterly inhuman, boomed from unseen emitters, so powerful it felt like a physical pressure against his skin.
Threat detected. Subject physiology exhibits extreme trauma markers. Analysis. Subject is the sole survivor of a Class Omega kinetic event. Destructive potential unknown. Lethal containment authorized.
Before Riggs could fully translate lethal containment into "you're about to be vaporized," A figure dropped from a balcony 30 meters above. It landed without a sound, a whisper of motion in the crimson chaos, positioning itself between Riggs and the firing squad. It was a Telosian, like the Sentinels, but larger with broader shoulders. The insignia of a prefect adorned his severe dark gray uniform. He rose to his full intimidating height, crossing all four of his arms in a gesture of profound annoyance. He spoke directly into Riggs's mind, a sensation like cold water poured over his thoughts. The universal translator clipped to Riggs's ear wasn't translating words, it was decoding a raw telepathic signal, a strange fusion of biology and technology. State your designation and clarify the nature of the kinetic event you endured immediately. The mental voice was sharp and carried the unmistakable tone of a bureaucrat whose lunch break had been violently interrupted. Riggs stared at the officer, then at the half-dozen rifles still humming with lethal intent, then down at his own hands. On impulse, he shoved up the crisp, short sleeve of his new uniform. His arm was a pale tapestry of scars. A thick, puckered line ran from his wrist to his elbow, a memento from a malfunctioning plasma cutter that had tried to amputate his forearm. A faint starburst pattern of tiny white dots peppered his bicep, souvenirs from a rivet gun that had exploded 3 meters away. A jagged, silvery track coiled near his shoulder, a reminder of a close argument with a territorial Ferris hound over a mostly intact servo motor. He looked back at the four-armed officer, his mind a howling void. "Kinetic event?" he asked, his voice a pathetic squeak. He cleared his throat, swallowed, and aimed for an unearned confidence. "Nah, just a few scrapes. Occupational hazards from Earth." The interrogation room was a white cube, so bright and sterile it felt less like a room and more like the inside of a light bulb. The air hummed with the whisper of high-efficiency scrubbers. Riggs sat in a form-fitting chair that seemed designed by a chiropractor with a grudge, facing Prefect Tarsus and a being who could only be the Academy's supreme commander. This one was a granite hegemon, a species that looked like a sentient geological formation. He was colossal. His skin was a mosaic of gray, crystalline rock, and his deep-set eyes, like chips of smoky quartz, regarded Riggs with an unnerving, ageless patience. A smaller alien, a Loric technician with 3 trembling, multi-jointed fingers, jabbered at a holographic display that floated between them. The display showed a detailed anatomical model of Riggs, and it was lit up like a festival tree with red and yellow warning icons. "Prefects," the Loric technician stammered, his fingers fluttering across the hologram's controls. "The registration arch's primary function is threat assessment. It performs a deep-level physiological scan on every entrant. It catalogs everything. His skeletal structure shows a density 28% above human baseline, but it's riddled with healed microfractures. The pattern is consistent with repeated extreme G-force exposure or multiple severe concussive events." He swiped a finger, and the display zoomed in on Riggs's spine. "We see residual synaptic scarring along the 7th cervical vertebra. The signature matters with exposure to a high-yield directed energy discharge, non-lethal but profoundly debilitating. His soft tissues are saturated with microscopic particulates, ferrous alloys, industrial polymers, trace radioactive isotopes, a classic indicator of proximity to an exotic munition detonation." The technician took a ragged breath, his 3 eyes blinking rapidly. "Individually, any of these readings are severe anomalies. Combined, they create a physiological profile that is a statistical impossibility. No known battlefield engagement, no conventional warfare could produce this specific constellation of injuries. The only entry into the entire compact threat database that matches this profile is post-trauma data from a Class Omega World-Breaker event." Prefect Tarsus's mental voice was a low, dangerous thrum inside Riggs's skull. "Cadet Callahan, your file indicates you hail from a sector designated the great Indiana Mire. Describe this world breaker your planet suffered. Riggs's mind spun. His scholarship, his one chance to escape a planet determined to kill him with tetanus, was evaporating. If they branded him a liar, or worse, a malfunctioning weapon system, they'd ship him back on the next outbound ore freighter. Back in the mire, the only career paths were starving to death or being murdered for the steel in your boots. He looked at their grim, expectant faces. They had a theory, a neat, horrifying box to put his messy, chaotic life into. Denying it would involve explaining a reality they couldn't possibly comprehend. A small, rat-like part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive for 20 years, began to chant a simple mantra. Don't get sent back. Don't get sent back. Give them the story they want. The events, Riggs started, his throat suddenly dry. He chose his words with the care of a man disarming a tripwire. Right, that was pretty noisy? The granite hegemon, Overlord Duran, leaned forward. The movement was slow and ponderous, accompanied by the faint sound of grinding stone. His voice was a low rumble, like continents colliding in slow motion.
We surmise you suffer from trauma-induced memory suppression. Allow us to assist your recollection. Your bone density.
He gestured with a craggy hand at the glowing red skeleton on the display.
Explain it.
The bones? Riggs said, forcing a shrug. Fell off a 3-story gantry onto a pile of I-beams. The med bot that patched me up said the reinforcement plates it installed would make them stronger. Suppose it wasn't lying. Tarsus and Duran exchanged a glance. It was a look that transcended species, the universal expression of two professionals encountering a problem far outside their operational parameters. The Loric technician made a soft gagging sound. And the synaptic scarring, Tarsus pressed, his mental tone edged with disbelief. The energy weapon signature? That, Riggs said, the lie now feeling disturbingly close to the truth. Was trying to rig a water purifier to a main power circuit. Used a bent spanner to bridge the connection. Big surge. It threw me about 6 meters. My whole left side went numb for a week. A heavy quiet settled over the white cube. Overlord Duran's stony face remained impassive, but a thick, rocky ridge above one eye twitched, a gesture that was probably the hegemon equivalent of a full-body spasm.
The particulates,
Duran rumbled.
The exotic munition residue.
Riggs gave a small, helpless gesture. You live in a scrapyard, you breathe scrap. We call it Monday. The Loric technician's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed, slumping to the polished floor in a silent, undignified heap. Neither of the senior officers so much as glanced at him. Tarsus and Duran stared at Riggs, their expressions a cocktail of horrified pity and profound confusion. They weren't just hearing his words. Their advanced, orderly minds were struggling to conceptualize a world where plummeting from buildings, being electrocuted by municipal infrastructure, and inhaling aerolized metal was considered a mundane biography. A place so fundamentally shattered that it inflicted the wounds of a doomsday weapon on its inhabitants as a matter of daily life. For them, it was simpler, more rational, to accept the reality of a single, world-shattering cataclysm than to entertain the notion of a billion tiny, grinding apocalypses. Finally, Duran spoke, his voice resonating in Riggs's chest.
His memories are clearly fractured. A psychological defense mechanism.
Tarsus nodded, his forearms unfolding and recrossing in a gesture of resolution. Agreed. The originating trauma is too profound for a conscious mind to process. He has constructed a narrative of mundane misfortunes to shield himself from the singular, overwhelming truth. His mental gaze, sharp as a laser scalpel, fixed on Riggs. Cadet Callahan, you are provisionally cleared. For security reasons, your file will be sealed under the highest classification, Top Secret, Sole Survivor, Classified Kinetic Event. You will not speak of this matter to anyone. Is that understood? Riggs, whose heart was trying to batter its way out of his ribcage, nodded with frantic speed. Clear as a bell? Not a peep. As an orderly escorted him out, stepping carefully over the unconscious technician, a single, triumphant thought echoed in Riggs's mind. Holy hell! They bought it! The human barracks, as they were charitably called, occupied a decommissioned maintenance sector in a forgotten sub-level of the Crucible. The air carried the faint, chemical tang of the station's waste reclamation systems, a smell that was unpleasantly familiar to Riggs. The placement was a clear, unspoken message. You are permitted to be here, but you are not of here. Riggs located his assigned billet, a converted storage locker with a cot bolted to one wall, and tossed his duffel bag onto it. So, this was his new life. It smelled a lot like his old one. Before he could fully process the irony, an adjutant appeared in the doorway. Cadet Callahan, your quartering assignment has changed by order of the Overlord. Come with me. The adjutant led him away from the pungent human sector, up several levels to the main cadet wings. Here the corridors were wide and bright, and the air was crisp and clean. He stopped before a door and gestured. Your new billet. Your roommate is within. Riggs stepped inside and found himself face to face with a Gneiss. Specifically, the largest, most slab-like Gneiss Riggs had ever seen. The cadet sat on a bunk, his blocky form somehow looking both comfortable and immovable, meticulously polishing a piece of geological survey equipment. He looked up, his eyes deep-set and analytical within his stony face.
Cadet Callahan,
he rumbled, his voice like rocks tumbling down a slope.
I am Hadron. Welcome.
Riggs, he managed, baffled. Aren't I supposed to be downstairs with the other smells?
You were,
Hadron said, his expression as readable as a cliff face.
Following the incident at intake, Overlord Duran has reclassified you as a subject of extreme tactical significance. I am a student of military history and strategic theory. I am assigned to observe and document your operational methods. It is a singular opportunity.
So, you're my babysitter, Riggs translated.
An accurate and concise summary.
Hadron agreed, picking up a datapad and making a note with a thick, stony finger. In the mess hall, the rumor mill had already ground Riggs' story into a legend. Cadets from a dozen species gave him a wide berth, their glances a mixture of awe and fear. The Doomsday Survivor was an aberration, a living ghost story. He sat with Hadron, trying to savor what was likely the first nutritionally complete, non-carcinogenic meal of his life. Heard they moved you to the penthouse suite, a voice cut in. Suri, another human, slid into the seat opposite him. Her knuckles were already scraped raw from a close encounter with a sparring drone. What's so special about you? Before Riggs could invent a plausible lie, a commotion erupted nearby. It was Peter, another human, a wiry kid who clutched his datapad of compact regulations like a sacred text. He stood before a hulking Gneiss cadet, his finger trembling as he pointed at the food dispenser.
Per the Compact Cadet Code of Conduct, Article 301, subsection D, all nutrient gel dispensers must be sanitized after each use. You have left a visible residue.
The Ganese cadet looked down at Peter as if he were a piece of talking lint. Before the situation could escalate, a figure moved. A Telosian cadet, tall and silver-haired, with an aristocratic bearing that screamed generations of unearned superiority. In a single, fluid motion, his forearms simultaneously plucked a sanitizing wipe from a wall unit, cleaned the minuscule smudge of gel, and deposited the soiled wipe into a disposal chute.
The regulation is satisfied,
the Telosian said, his voice cool and melodious. His piercing gaze slid past the sputtering Peter and settled on Riggs. He glided to their table, his movements a perfect, infuriating display of effortless control. This had to be Viren of House Telos, the Academy's star pupil. He looked Riggs up and down, his expression one of carefully cultivated disappointment.
Riggs Callahan,
Viren said, his tone dripping with condescension.
The survivor. A reputation born of a sensor malfunction is as fragile as the flesh that houses it. Do not compound the error by proving it true.
He turned and strode away, the entire mess hall parting before him like the sea before a prophet. Riggs watched him go, a slow, familiar heat building in his gut. Suri scoffed.
Arrogant prick.
Hadron, who had observed the entire interaction without moving a single pebble on his face, made a note on his datapad.
Telosian martial philosophy,
he rumbled to himself.
Rigidly dogmatic. Note: research asymmetrical counters.
The first major physical evaluation was a zero-gravity combat simulation called the Crucible's Gauntlet. It was a chaotic, three-dimensional maze of spinning rings, shifting platforms, and holographic barriers suspended inside a massive, spherical chamber. The 5 humans were assigned to the same squad, a transparent public relations maneuver. It unraveled with spectacular speed.
Halt!
Peter shouted as they launched themselves into the chamber's entrance.
Regulation 45C states all team members must maintain a 2-meter separation in variable gravity fields for collision avoidance.
He abruptly fired his maneuvering thrusters to brake. Suri, who was right behind him, slammed into his back with a string of curses that were definitely not regulation. They tumbled away, a spinning, flailing wreck of limbs and indignation, disqualified for obstructing the course. A few obstacles later, the remaining 3 faced a shimmering wall of hard light with a small, erratically moving gap. Suri, snarling about aliens underestimating human resilience, ignored the gap entirely and attempted to punch her way through the barrier. Alarms blared.
Destruction of academic property is grounds for immediate disqualification.
A serene, disembodied voice announced. A tractor beam unceremoniously snagged Suri and dragged her from the arena. The twins, Gaia and Nico, moved with an unnerving, mirrored synchronicity until they reached a fork where the paths split. A holographic sign indicated that they had to take separate routes to deactivate the next barrier. They stopped dead in the void.
We do not separate,
they said in perfect unison. They floated there, motionless and resolute, until their timer expired. Riggs was alone. He looked ahead. Viren's squad of Telosians, who had run the course moments before, had moved like a synchronized school of fish, a breathtaking display of telepathic coordination and flawless execution. Now, 2 of Viren's sycophants were zipping around Riggs, their movements tauntingly perfect, herding him toward a dead end. Panic, hot and sharp, flared in Riggs's chest. trapped, cornered. It was the same feeling he'd had scavenging in the collapsed monorail tunnels when a rival crew tried to box him into a derelict train car. His survival instinct, an ugly and brutally effective thing, took over. He didn't have a plan, he had an opportunity. He looked down at the standard issue utility belt cinched around his waist. It was secured by a heavy magnetic clasp. With a grunt, he unhooked it. As the two Telosians closed in, their expressions smug, Riggs let out a wild, undignified yell. He swung the belt over his head like a slingshot and let it fly. The magnetic clasp slammed onto a distant support strut with a loud, metallic clang. Clinging to the other end of the belt, he used his forward momentum and the sudden improvised anchor to swing himself in a wide, chaotic, and completely uncontrolled arc. He wasn't flying. He was a human wrecking ball. He shot past the two startled Telosians, his heavy mag boots catching them both squarely in their chests. They spun off into the darkness like a pair of exquisitely designed 9-pins. The belt slipped from his grasp. He was now hurtling toward the finish line with no propulsion and no way to stop. He tucked into a ball, ricocheted off two more obstacles with bone-jarring impacts, and slammed into the final landing pad chest first, skidding to a halt with his head hanging over the edge. He'd finished. His time, miraculously, had beaten Viren's. Not with grace, or skill, or anything resembling proper technique. He won by a mix of panic, momentum, and the kind of disorder no one could have planned. He lay plastered to the landing pad, his lungs burning. His muscles weren't just aching, they were staging a full-scale, profanity-laced rebellion. Hadron drifted in moments later, landing with a soft, controlled thud. He already had his datapad out.
Fascinating,
He rumbled, making a note.
a non-standard application of issued equipment to generate unexpected centrifugal force. I shall classify this technique as the Callahan Centrifugal Offensive.
That evening, Prefect Tarsus summoned Riggs to his office. The room was stark and orderly. Cadet Callahan. His mental voice was flat, devoid of inflection. The other human candidates have been reassigned to remedial programs. The integration mandate is, for all practical purposes, now focused entirely on you. Before we proceed, we must confirm your psychological stability. He gestured to a single simulation chair in the center of the room. Riggs was strapped in, and a cool, heavy helmet was lowered over his head. The world dissolved into white noise, then reformed. He stood on a familiar, crumbling street corner. The sky was a permanent chemical orange. The skeletons of ruined skyscrapers clawed at the horizon. It was a perfect, high-fidelity recreation of the great Indiana mire. His home. A flicker of something. Not fear, but a weary, ingrained caution touched him. Then it passed. A simulated pack of Ferris hounds, their optics glowing a menacing red, stalked out of a collapsed storefront. Riggs picked up a loose piece of rebar from a pile of rubble and calmly cracked the lead hound across its snout. It yelped, a synthesized sound of pain, and flickered out of existence. His internal monologue was one of pure bewilderment. I think this is a stress test? The quiet is the worst part. On a normal day, you'd hear the streak of the rust eagles, the groan of failing power grids, the constant grinding roar of the processing plants. This is peaceful. He completed the simulation's objective, retrieving a data core from a heavily fortified ruin by prying open a maintenance grate in the back of the building, a vulnerability the simulation's programmers hadn't considered. When the simulation ended, Prefect Tarsus was staring at the diagnostic screen, his forearms crossed in a tight knot of absolute confusion. This is the harrowing of Xylos, the most psychologically devastating combat simulation in the compact database. Tarsus's thought echoed with disbelief. Your heart rate never exceeded its resting state. Your biosigns indicated a state of relaxation. Why? Riggs shrugged, genuinely baffled by the question. Seemed kinda nice, honestly. Less background radiation than usual. His status as the sole human survivor of the integration mandate meant he was permanently reassigned to Viren's elite Telosian squad. It was supposed to be a learning opportunity for him and a lesson in patience for them. It was neither. They materialized on the simulated bridge of a pirate corsair for a boarding exercise. Standard Trident assault pattern, Viren commanded telepathically, his mental voice a seamless symphony of coordinated intent. On my mark. They were ambushed instantly. The adaptive AI, programmed with the tactics of 1,000 pirate clans, poured from maintenance shafts and ceiling vents, ignoring the predictable choke points Telosian doctrine was designed to exploit. Viren's rigid, perfect formation faltered. The telepathic coordination that was their greatest strength became a crippling weakness as stray thoughts of surprise and confusion muddied their shared mental space. From the observation chamber, Prefect Tarsus watched the data streams, his expression a mixture of alarm and academic fascination. He gestured to an aide. Isolate the psionic feedback from the battle network. The aide peered at the screen. It's chaotic, Prefect, like signal interference. It's more than interference, Tarsus thought, his focus entirely on the readouts. The Compact's universal translator tech was designed to interface with the Telosian psionic network, but Riggs's brain was an untrained, unordered wilderness. His thoughts, a chaotic jumble of instinct, memory, and improvisation, were broadcasting on the same frequency as their commands. The human's neural patterns are pure entropy. He is an unintentional cognitive jammer. On the bridge, Riggs's presence was like a feedback screech in their perfectly tuned orchestra. Every time he ducked when he should have advanced, or scrambled left when the formation moved right, it sent a ripple of cognitive dissonance through their mind link. They hesitated, their perfect synchronization thrown into disarray by a single, unpredictable variable. Seeing the perfect plan collapsing around them, Riggs decided to do what he did best: make things worse in a strategically advantageous way. He spotted a large, red cylinder mounted on the bulkhead, labeled Emergency Atmosphere Purge, a glorified fire extinguisher. "Catch you later!" he yelled into the comm, a pointless but deeply satisfying gesture. He ripped the extinguisher from its mountings, aimed it behind him, and squeezed the trigger. An uncontrolled blast of pressurized cryofoam erupted, launching him down the corridor like a drunken torpedo. He ricocheted off the walls, a human pinball of mayhem, as the other Telosians stared in horrified disbelief. He landed in a heap right behind the main pirate squad. Before they could turn, he tore a comms panel from the wall, stripped 2 wires he knew from experience carried a high amperage, and slammed them together. A deafening, high-frequency sonic blast shrieked through the pirates' helmet comms. They dropped, clutching their heads, their virtual bodies glitching out of existence. The squad passed the simulation. Viren was incandescent with a silent, telepathic rage that felt like Riggs's brain was being slow-cooked. Hadron, who had observed the entire fiasco from a geologically stable location, was waiting at the exit, datapad in hand.
A truly revolutionary application of standard safety equipment for rapid flanking and area of effect incapacitation,
he noted, his voice filled with academic glee.
I shall call it the pressurized gas flanking maneuver.
In the mess hall, Riggs was an island in a sea of cadets. The doomsday survivor was now also the unhinged human wrecking ball. He was a legend and a pariah in equal measure. Hadron sat opposite him, methodically consuming a nutrient brick.
Your pressurized gas flanking maneuver defied all conventional tactical models. What was the strategic doctrine behind its conception?
Riggs, his mouth full of a surprisingly palatable gray paste, swallowed. I don't know, big guy. Seemed like a good idea at the time. A shadow fell over their table. It was Viren, his expression colder than interstellar space.
Your ideas are a disgrace to this institution,
Viren said, his voice low and seething.
You flail and stumble your way to victory through sheer random chance. There is no honor in it. A perfect strategy is its own victory. A victory without perfection is merely a successful failure.
Look, pretty boy, Riggs said, setting his utensil down. Where I'm from, you either live or you die. Nobody cares how perfect your corpse looks. The static of Viren's telepathic frustration was a physical pressure in the air. He drew himself up to his full, imposing height. There is only one way to resolve this, Viren declared, his voice ringing through the suddenly silent mess hall. I, Viren of House Telos, challenge you, Riggs Callahan of Earth, to the Solasthil, a duel of honor, plasma blades, zero-gravity arena, at dawn. A collective, multi-species gasp rippled through the room. The Solasthil was a sacred, ancient Telosian tradition. To refuse was to admit cowardice, to confirm for all time that he was nothing but a fraud. Prefect Tarsus appeared at the edge of the crowd, his mental voice a sharp command in both their heads. Cadet Var, stand down. This is a severe breach of the Academy protocol. With respect, Prefect, Viren projected, his gaze locked on Riggs. The traditions of the Crucible are absolute. He has questioned the very foundations of Telosian martial philosophy. That cannot go unanswered. Riggs felt 100 pairs of eyes on him. He was trapped. He knew, with a certainty that settled like a cold stone in his gut, that he could not win a sword fight against a four-armed telepathic aristocrat who had been training for this since he was an egg. But he also knew he couldn't back down. He swallowed hard. A forced, lopsided grin stretched across his face. Sure, Riggs said, his voice far steadier than he felt. Why not? My morning's free.
You are going to lose,
Hadron stated flatly. It wasn't an insult. It was a geological fact. They were in a private training room. Hadron was running combat simulations on a holo display, showing Viren's fighting style. It was a dizzying, beautiful, and utterly unstoppable whirlwind of attacks from 4 different angles at once. Yeah, got that. Thanks, big fella, Riggs muttered, pacing the room like a caged animal. Any helpful advice besides composing a eulogy?
Statistically, your chances of winning a direct confrontation are 0.003%,
Hadron rumbled.
Therefore, you must alter the fundamental parameters of the engagement.
And what does that mean in English?
It means you cannot fight his fight,
Hadron said, turning his stony gaze from the display to Riggs.
You must force him to fight yours.
The words clicked. Something shifted in Riggs's mind. He couldn't win a sword fight. He was a scavenger. He didn't play by the rules, he exploited them. "Hadron?" Riggs said, a slow, wolfish grin spreading across his face. "Keep running those sims. I'm gonna go scout the location." The Zero-G duel arena was a place of high ceremony, steeped in centuries of Telosian honor. And that, Riggs realized, was its greatest weakness. He didn't study the arena itself. He studied the forgotten maintenance corridors and utility conduits that surrounded it. He discovered that the pre-duel scanners were calibrated with exquisite sensitivity to detect active energy sources, known weaponized alloys, and anything on the compact's extensive list of restricted items. They would never conceive of someone bringing a simple, inert chunk of scrap metal to a plasma blade duel. It was like bringing a rock to a gunfight, not just ineffective, but deeply insulting to the art of combat itself. In a small, unlocked maintenance closet behind one of the spectator galleries, a careless repair drone had left something behind. A heavy, magnetic gravity spanner, used for tightening the bolts on the grav plating. It weighed at least 5 kilos. It was perfect. He didn't train to win. He trained to survive. As he practiced the heft and balance of the spanner in the privacy of his room, his mind drifted back to the gray, grinding reality he'd escaped. "Win or lose," he thought, gripping the cold, dense metal. "It beats fighting Ferris hounds for expired ration packs. Just don't let them send me back." The entire academy was watching. In the center of the Zero-G sphere, Riggs and Viren floated, facing each other. Viren held 2 shimmering plasma blades, their low hum a deadly song. His other 2 arms were held behind his back in a gesture of formal combat. He was a vision of silver-haired, lethal grace. Riggs held a single blade, its weight unfamiliar in his hand. Tucked into the small of his back, hidden from view, was the cold, heavy reality of the gravity spanner.
"Let the solar steel commence!"
a formal voice announced. Viren was a blur of motion. Riggs was instantly on the defensive, doing everything he could just to not be carved into pieces. It wasn't a fight, it was a desperate, ugly scramble. Viren, with a telepathic sigh of pure, static-filled disappointment, finally saw his opening. He feinted high with one blade and lunged low with the other, a textbook maneuver that left Riggs completely exposed. This was it. As Viren's blade lunged for his ribs, Riggs did the last thing the Telosian expected. He planted both his mag boots on Viren's chest and kicked off with every ounce of strength he possessed. The move sent him spinning backward into the void, away from the lethal blade but completely out of control.
"Callahan!"
he screamed, a raw, desperate sound that was part battle cry, part sheer terror. In the middle of his uncontrolled backward tumble, he ripped the heavy gravity spanner from his belt. He didn't aim. He just hurled it with all his might into the general vicinity of Viren's outstretched weapon. He didn't need to be accurate. The plasma blade's powerful magnetic containment field did the work for him. The field, designed to shape and control superheated plasma, latched onto the dense, ferrous mass of the spanner, violently yanking the heavy tool toward it faster than a fired bullet. There was a sickening crunch of shattering emitters and overloading circuits. The spanner smashed directly into the hilt of the plasma blade. The sword shorted out in a brilliant, blinding shower of sparks. In that split second of shock, as Viren stared at his ruined weapon, Riggs used his wild, chaotic momentum. He spun past the stunned Telosian, his own blade swinging in a clumsy but effective arc that knocked Viren's second plasma sword from his grip. Riggs came to a halt, panting, his body screaming in protest. Viren was disarmed. It was over. He had won. The entire academy was stunned into absolute silence. The only sound in the vast sphere was Riggs's own ragged breathing. Then, from the spectator gallery, Hadron's deep voice rumbled as he made a note on his datapad.
Strategic kinetic disruption of energy weapon emitters via primitive projectile. Duly noted.
Before the shock could even wear off, a new sound ripped through the station. Not a simulation alarm, the real alarms. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the same pulsing crimson emergency lighting from Riggs's first day. A calm, cold voice echoed from every speaker. Code red. External breach detected on docking bays 7 through 9. Station has been boarded by unidentified hostiles. This is not a drill. On the main view screen, which flickered to life, a fleet of ragged, ugly mercenary ships was visible, their weapons spitting fire at the crucible. The Carrion Lords. The duel was forgotten. The invasion had begun. The Carrion Lords moved with brutal speed, jamming communications and sealing blast doors to cut the station into isolated pockets of resistance. Riggs, Viren, Hadron, and a handful of other cadets were trapped in the training wing with Prefect Tarsus. Tarsus was at a tactical terminal, his 4 hands a blur across the console. His face was pale. "They're using old hegemony clearance codes," he said, his mental voice tight with strain. "Codes from my service during the Cinder Rim sieges. Command deemed replacing them logistically inefficient." He brought up a schematic of the station, a blinking red line showing the invaders' path. "This is a smash and grab. They're making for the auxiliary command center. It houses the schematics for the prototype singularity cannon. They'll overload the training wing's reactor on their way out to cover their escape." They were standing on a time bomb. While Tarsus and a still reeling Viren tried to organize the terrified cadets into a disciplined phalanx, a manic, familiar grin spread across Riggs's face. This wasn't a pristine military installation anymore. It was a chaotic, broken-down, jury-rigged mess. It was home. "Okay," he said, his voice cutting through the rising panic. "This part I know how to do." He strode over to a wall panel and tore it open with his bare hands, exposing a thicket of cables and conduits. He wasn't hacking the system. He was breaking it in very specific, useful ways. "Hadron, I need the high-pressure coolant tanks from the life support simulators. Now! Viren, forget formations. Find a high spot and start taking pot shots at anything that moves." "Prefect," Riggs said, looking directly at Tarsus. "I'm gonna need you to cause a distraction. Something loud, bright, and very, very much against regulations." For the first time since Riggs had met him, Prefect Tarsus looked completely lost. All his training, all his doctrine, was for a clean, honorable battle that wasn't happening. He looked at Riggs, a human mess of scars and terrible ideas, and saw the only person in the room who seemed to have a plan. They fell back corridor by corridor, leaving a trail of improvised traps made from dismantled training drones and overloaded power conduits. They were in the main gauntlet chamber when they were finally pinned down. A squad of mercenaries, professionals in scarred, mismatched armor, had used a flanking maneuver that perfectly countered standard compact doctrine. Tarsus's textbook response, a shield wall and controlled volley fire, failed instantly. In that moment, as plasma fire stitched the bulkhead above his head, a memory hit Tarsus like a physical blow. A brief, sharp flash of the Cinder Rim. His squad, his friends, following his perfect plan, being cut to ribbons by pirates using these exact same unpredictable, chaotic tactics. He froze, the old trauma rising to choke him. Through the haze of his own panic, he saw Riggs. The human wasn't cowering. He was He was frantically prying open a floor panel with a piece of scrap metal, exposing the main power conduit for the chamber's anti-gravity plates. In that moment of crisis, Prefect Tarsus made a choice. He turned his full telepathic focus to Viren and the other terrified cadets. He barked a single mental order that rang with a newfound, desperate clarity. "Follow his lead!" Riggs ripped the conduit loose from its housing. He didn't try to rewire it. He just started smacking it against the metal casing. Sparks flew. The anti-gravity field across the entire chamber flickered wildly, stuttering on and off like a faulty strobe light. The mercenaries were thrown into chaos, flung from the floor to the ceiling as gravity reversed, then slammed down again with bone-jarring force. They were incapacitated, without a single shot being fired. They made it to the final corridor before the command center. Guarding it was the mercenary leader, a brute in heavy, customized power armor, flanked by 2 elite guards. They were dug in behind an energy shield, their heavy, repeating plasma cannons making the corridor a death trap. The battered team was out of ideas, penned down behind a barricade of wrecked training dummies. Hadron, using a slab of bulkhead as a shield, grunted as a plasma bolt sizzled against it.
Riggs!
He roared over the gunfire.
The simulation projector! Your diagnostic file is still in its active buffer! Create a chaotic visual field!
Riggs's eyes lit up. He didn't throw anything this time. He scrambled up the barricade, dodging a spray of plasma that melted the wall where his head had been a second before. He launched himself at the wall panel next to the large simulation projector, ripping the cover off with his bare hands. He found the 2 conduits he was looking for, power feed and data buffer, and slammed them together. Sparks erupted. The projector glitched and stuttered to life, dumping its entire buffer memory into the corridor. The space was instantly filled with 100 flickering, screaming holograms of Riggs from his psychological evaluation, all running in different directions through a simulated hellscape of the mire. The mercenary leader and his guards hesitated, their targeting systems going haywire as they tried to track 100 identical non-existent targets. "Now!" Tarsus projected, his voice a clarion call. Hadron charged, a walking mountain of stone and fury, absorbing their panicked fire on his makeshift shield. Viren moved like a phantom, his single plasma blade a silver blur, disarming the 2 elite guards with 2 strikes. Riggs, seeing his opening, swung down from a gantry on a loose power cable, a move he'd practiced 1,000 times in the skeletal ruins of home. He let go at the apex of his swing, his mag boots connecting squarely with the mercenary leader's helmet. The leader stumbled back, crashing into the blast door control console. The console exploded in a shower of sparks, shorting out and flash-frying the drive data the Merc had been trying to steal. The heavy command center door hissed shut, sealing them in and the threat out. In the quiet aftermath, as compact forces methodically secured the station, Overlord Duran himself found them amidst the wreckage. Prefect Tarsus stepped forward, his uniform torn and scorched. His mental voice was devoid of its usual stiffness, filled instead with a raw, hard-won respect.
Sir, standard doctrines failed. Our survival is a direct result of Cadet Callahan's unconventional tactical genius.
Viren, covered in grime and soot, stepped forward. He looked at Riggs, and for the first time, there was no condescension in his gaze. He gave a formal, respectful Telosian bow, crossing his 2 lower arms over his chest.
"Your victory in the duel was earned," Viren said, his voice clear and even. "Your victory today saved us all. There is honor in survival."
Riggs, uncharacteristically quiet, just nodded. Then a slow, weary grin spread across his face. "Hey," he said, his voice hoarse from smoke and yelling. "You know what they say back home? A stupid plan that works ain't stupid. Riggs was in the medbay. A medic ran a diagnostic scanner over him, the exact same model that had caused all the trouble at the registration arch. The scanner beeped. The medic frowned at the screen.
Strange, he muttered. The trauma signatures are inconsistent. We have multiple new microfractures and energy burns, but the systemic resonance from the initial scan has diminished. It almost looks like...
Before he could say, a malfunctioning scanner, Riggs cut him off. He winced as he sat up, a tired grin on his face. He looked past the medic to Prefect Tarsus, who stood in the doorway, his forearms for once hanging relaxed at his sides, an expression of grudging admiration on his face.
"Don't worry about it,"
Riggs said.
"It's just another scratch."
In a quiet corner of the observation room, Hadron solemnly made a final note on his datapad. He tapped the screen, finalizing the title of his now voluminous thesis. The words gleamed in the sterile light of the medbay. The Callahan Corollary, a dissertation on applied bedlam in modern engagements. Tarsus watched the medic finish patching up the last of Riggs's new cuts. His mental voice entered Riggs's mind, no longer sharp and bureaucratic, but quiet and resonant, like a bell struck once.
Cadet Callahan, I have reviewed the incident report and your file.
Riggs looked over at the prefect.
"Guessing I'm on dish duty for life for wrecking half the training wing."
A faint, dry static that might have been the Telosian equivalent of a chuckle brushed against Riggs's thoughts.
On the contrary, I have just submitted a formal request to Overlord Durin. The harrowing of Xylos simulation is being retired. We're replacing it with a new, mandatory final exam for all command track cadets.
Tarsus gestured vaguely at Riggs.
It will be called Just Another Monday.
Before Riggs could process that, another figure appeared in the doorway. It was Viren. His silver hair was disheveled, his uniform stained with soot, but he stood tall. He walked over to the medical bed, not with the liquid grace of an aristocrat, but with the steady, deliberate gait of a soldier. He looked Riggs in the eye, and the condescension that had once been a permanent feature of his gaze was gone, replaced by something hard and clear. Respect.
Callahan,
Viren said, his voice quiet but carrying through the room.
I once told you that a victory without perfection is merely a successful failure.
He took a breath.
I was wrong. A victory is the victory. The method is secondary to the outcome.
He offered his hand, just one this time, a remarkably human gesture. Riggs took it. Viren's grip was firm.
Your chaos has a certain brutal elegance,
Viren admitted, the words tasting strange in his mouth.
I believe I have much to learn from it.
Hey, Riggs said with a weary but genuine grin. A stupid plan that works ain't stupid. Glad you're finally catching on. Tarsus stepped forward, his own gaze fixed on Riggs.
Your classified file has been a subject of considerable debate. The sole survivor of a Class Omega kinetic event theory no longer holds. The truth, we now surmise, is far more significant.
He brought up a holographic interface on his wrist projector. He navigated to a heavily encrypted file marked with a single, stark Omega symbol.
We believed your scars were the result of a single, world-shattering weapon,
Tarsus projected, his thought clear for all to perceive.
We were mistaken. They are the result of a world that is itself a weapon, a crucible far harsher than our own.
With a final, decisive gesture, Tarsus deleted the file. A new one took its place. The classification was no longer a secret born of confusion, but a commendation born of awe. It read, Cadet Riggs Callahan. Origin, Earth. Designation, Asset. For the first time since he'd left the mire, Riggs felt the knot of anxiety in his chest finally, fully unwind. He wasn't a charity case. He wasn't a statistical anomaly. He was an asset. He belonged. The galaxy had spent millennia preparing for planet killers and doomsday weapons, for singular, cataclysmic threats that could be analyzed, predicted, and countered with perfect doctrine. They had never prepared for humanity. They had never considered a species so accustomed to chaos that they treated apocalypse as an occupational hazard, a people so stubbornly resilient that they turned broken tools into weapons and certain death into a flanking maneuver. They were a species whose entire history was a testament to the fact that the most effective plan is often the one you make up a second before you die. And in the quiet, sterile halls of the galaxy's most elite academy, a new and vital lesson was being learned, a truth etched into every scar on the human standing before them. Do not mistake the marks of a survivor for damage. They are a resume.